My father sold everything I had for my stepmother's daughter. My name's Patrick, and I was only 12 when my dad decided to remarry. He had been a single parent since I was 8, ever since we lost Mom. Losing her felt like losing part of myself, and I think part of Dad got lost too. We were both struggling to get by without her, and for a long time, it was just the two of us. For 4 years, it stayed that way. I held on to every memory I could, afraid I'd lose her completely if I let any of it slip. The house felt like it was still filled with her presence. The things she left behind, her favorite blanket folded on the couch, a pair of her earrings in the drawer, even the smell of her perfume lingering in her old room. And then Dad came home one night and told me he'd met someone. He was sitting across from me at our small dining table, just the two of us like always. He cleared his throat, his fingers tapping the edge of his coffee mug, a nervous habit he had when he was about to say something important. "Patrick, there's something I want to talk to you about," he said, trying to catch my eye. I noticed lately that he'd been happier, smiling more, but I hadn't thought much of it. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I had no idea what was coming, but something about his tone made me sit up straight. "I've been seeing someone. Her name's Claire, and I really like her," he continued, like he was testing the words out on me. He didn't say anything more for a moment, just looked at me, waiting for some kind of response. I nodded, swallowing down the feeling of betrayal that rose up inside me. It wasn't her fault, and it wasn't his either, but I couldn't help it. It felt like a door was closing on the world I'd been living in since she died, a world where it was just Dad and me, bound together by our shared loss. Then he told me, "I'm thinking of asking her to marry me." A few weeks after that talk, Dad brought Claire over to meet me. He didn't call it that, of course. He just mentioned that he wanted me to come home straight after school, because someone was coming over for dinner. But I knew deep down it wasn't just anyone. I remember coming home that day with 1,000 thoughts swirling through my mind. Every step up the driveway felt heavy, like I was carrying bricks in my backpack. I was so used to our quiet, simple life. Dad and me, pizza Fridays and movies on the couch. How was it going to feel having someone else in the mix, someone who didn't know our routines, our jokes, our silences? When I walked through the front door, Dad was already waiting. He was dressed better than usual, collared shirt, even a fresh shave. He grinned when he saw me, but I could tell he was nervous. "Patrick," he said, with an edge of excitement that I hadn't seen in years, "I'd like you to meet Claire." She was standing next to him, this tall woman with soft blonde curls that fell around her shoulders. She had a kind smile, I'll give her that. Her eyes were warm and friendly, and she looked about as nervous as I felt. She wore a blue dress, modest but somehow elegant, like she was trying to make a good impression without trying too hard. "Hi, Patrick," she said, her voice gentle. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Hi," I replied, a little quieter than I intended. I wasn't trying to be rude, but what was I supposed to say? The words felt tangled up in my head, and I couldn't seem to get any of them out. Instead, I just stood there, shifting my weight and glancing back and forth between her and Dad. Dad noticed my silence, and he jumped in, trying to fill the air with small talk. "Claire loves reading," he said like this was some interesting fact. "She has a collection of old books, and I told her you like mysteries." I forced a smile. "That's cool." It was the first thing that came to mind, but it sounded hollow, even to me. I did love reading, but hearing Dad talk about me to someone else, like he was introducing his son to a stranger, felt strange. Almost like I was on display. Dinner was awkward. Dad made spaghetti, something simple because he was a nervous cook. As we ate, he and Claire kept glancing at each other, sharing these little smiles that made me feel like an outsider in my own kitchen. Claire asked questions, easy ones like what grade I was in, what kind of music I liked, how school was going. I answered politely, even tried to make conversation, but every answer felt like I was just giving her the bare minimum. I couldn't help it. A part of me wanted to keep her at arm's length, to protect the life I knew from this change I wasn't sure I was ready for. But then she mentioned her daughter. "Patrick, I'd love for you to meet my little girl Lily sometime. She's 3, and she's full of energy. She would love someone like you to look up to," Claire said, her eyes lighting up. I blinked, surprised. A little girl? That part hadn't hit me until that very moment. It was one thing to accept that Dad had found someone new, but it was something else entirely to think of sharing my life with a whole new family. My mouth felt dry, and I barely managed a nod. Yeah, maybe." There was a long pause, and Dad cleared his throat. "Patrick, we're hoping that, well, you'll get to know Claire and Lily, and that maybe." His voice trailed off, and he looked at me, almost pleading. I knew what he wanted. He wanted my approval. Maybe he thought that if I could just accept this, everything would slide into place, and we'd become some version of a new family. But I couldn't give him that answer, not then. I couldn't pretend that I was ready for this, that I was okay with someone stepping into Mom's place, that I could just flip a switch and feel normal about all of it. So I just gave a small, tight smile and nodded, hoping it would be enough to get us through the evening. A couple of weeks after that dinner, Claire and Lily moved in. It was faster than I expected, but Dad kept saying it would help us all settle in. He tried to make it sound like it was for my benefit, that maybe if we jumped right in, it would feel natural quicker. The morning they arrived, I heard their car pull up and the sound of Claire's voice directing the movers, followed by high-pitched laughter that could only be Lily. I sat in my room, feeling like I was frozen in place. I knew I should go out there, but the idea of meeting her, was harder than I thought it would be. Eventually, I forced myself out. I found Dad standing in the front hall, helping the movers with boxes. He smiled when he saw me, looking almost relieved. "Hey, kiddo, come on, help us out here." As soon as I stepped out of the hall, Lily's small voice rang out. "Who's that?" She was peeking out from behind a pile of boxes, her tiny face bright with curiosity. She looked even smaller than I'd imagined, with soft, curly blonde hair just like her mom's, and big blue eyes that sparkled with excitement. I forced a smile. "Hey, Lily. I'm Patrick." Her eyes widened, and she stepped forward shyly. "You live here too?" "Yep, I live here too," I said, trying to keep my voice light. I could see how eager she was, bouncing on her little feet, and her innocence made it harder to keep my distance. For her, this was just an adventure, moving into a new house with new people to meet. She had no idea how strange it all felt to me. Dad walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Patrick's going to be your big brother," he told Lily, grinning, like that was the most exciting thing in the world. "Big brother," Lily squealed, clapping her hands. She looked up at me with wide eyes, like she was waiting for me to give her some sign that I was just as thrilled as she was. But I wasn't. Not yet. It felt like I'd been cast in a role I hadn't auditioned for. Over the next few days, the house started changing bit by bit. Lily's toys spilled into the living room, bright and colorful against the faded carpet where Mom's things used to be. Claire's books lined the shelves, squeezing out some of Mom's old novels that Dad and I hadn't touched in years, but had kept because they were hers. Photos of Claire and Lily filled up the empty frames that had been sitting around untouched since Mom died. It all felt strange, like our home was being repainted one stroke at a time, and each change pulled us further away from the way things had been. One night, a few days after they'd moved in, I sat at the kitchen table, trying to do my homework. Claire was in the kitchen making dinner, and Lily was playing with blocks on the floor nearby. It was quiet, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. Claire looked over at me and smiled. "How's the homework going, Patrick?" I shrugged. "It's okay, I guess." She nodded, stirring a pot on the stove. "You know, if you ever need help, I'm pretty good at math," she offered, her voice warm. She was trying, I could tell, and part of me felt bad for putting up walls. But every time I looked at her, there was a part of me that felt like I was letting go of Mom, even though I knew that wasn't fair. Just then, Lily crawled over to me, holding up one of her blocks proudly. Look, Patrick," she said, holding up the wobbly tower she'd built. She looked at me with so much excitement, like she needed me to see her creation to make it real. "That's really cool, Lily," I said, forcing a smile. I wasn't lying, it was cool in a way, but at the same time, it felt wrong. I didn't want to admit it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this little girl, who just wanted to play and share a world with me, was slowly taking up space that I'd thought belonged to my memories of Mom. When Dad came home that night, he saw us sitting together and his face lit up. "Looks like everyone's settling in," he said with that same smile he always had these days. I could see the relief in his eyes, like he was convincing himself that this was exactly what we all needed. And as he pulled Lily into a hug and kissed her forehead, a tiny part of me felt invisible. Even though I was trying to keep things together, It was tough to feel like I belonged in this new version of our family. The more time that passed, the more it felt like our home was slowly becoming theirs. I felt like I was fading into the background, just an extra in their story. But even as I tried to adjust, I held on to one thing that kept me connected to Mom: her ring. Mom's ring wasn't anything flashy, but it was beautiful in a simple, quiet way. It had a soft, worn gold band with a small sapphire in the center, delicate but sturdy. It was the kind of piece you'd barely notice unless you knew to look for it. In her last letter to me, Mom had left it for me as a keepsake, a piece of her to carry with me as I grew up. She'd written, "Patrick, this ring has been passed down from my mother and her mother before her. One day, it will be yours, a reminder of who you are and where you come from." I remember sitting on my bed, holding the ring that first night she gave it to me. It was too big for my finger back then, so I'd looped it onto a chain and wore it around my neck, hidden under my shirt. I never took it off, and over the years, that ring became my little secret, my anchor. It was the one piece of her that no one could take from me. After Claire and Lily moved in, though, I found myself touching the ring more and more, especially when things felt out of place. Like the time I came home from school and saw Dad and Claire hanging new photos of our family on the walls. Pictures of the four of us at the park, Dad holding Lily up on his shoulders, and one of Claire and Dad laughing in the backyard. I felt like an extra in the background of those photos, just someone who happened to be there. Whenever those moments got to be too much, I'd slip into my room, close the door, and hold the ring in my hand, letting its cool metal press against my palm. I'd think about Mom, her gentle voice, the way she used to ruffle my hair, and how she'd always sit with me after a long day, just listening. The ring was all I had left of those memories, a physical reminder of the love we shared. I wasn't about to let it go. One evening, a few months after Claire and Lily moved in, I was sitting at the dinner table, absent-mindedly fiddling with the chain under my shirt. Claire noticed and gave me a soft smile. "What's that you're wearing, Patrick?" I glanced down, instinctively tucking the chain further under my shirt. "Oh, it's nothing. Just something of Mom's." Dad's face softened. He hadn't brought up Mom much since Claire came into our lives, and I could see the way he looked away, almost like he was uncomfortable. But Claire didn't back off. Instead, she reached across the table, her eyes kind but too curious. "You know, Patrick, your mother sounds like she was an amazing person. I'd love to hear more about her sometime." My hand clenched around the chain, and I forced a tight smile. Yeah, maybe. I didn't know if I could open up to Claire like that, not when it felt like every memory I had was slipping away, little by little. Mom was my memory, and I wasn't ready to share her, especially not with the woman who'd stepped into her place. Later that night, after everyone else was asleep, I sat in my room, holding the ring in my hand, watching the moonlight catch on the sapphire. I whispered, "Mom, I'm not letting go. No matter what, this ring is mine. You're still with me?" I stayed silent, watching the scene in front of me, feeling like a ghost in my own house. Life carried on, and I tried my best to adapt. It was hard, though, watching Dad get closer and closer to Claire and Lily. Each day, they felt more like a family, and each day, I felt like I was slipping further away from it. It was the little things that added up, I guess, like the way the house looked different now. Claire loved redecorating, so she'd bring home new throw pillows, fresh flowers, a painting she found at some art fair. It wasn't that they were bad changes, but with each new thing she added, another piece of Mom seemed to disappear. Mom's old throw blanket had been folded and put away, her favorite tea mugs replaced with sleek new ones. Even her old records, ones she used to play when she cooked, were swapped out for Claire's upbeat playlists. One afternoon, I came home to find the walls of the hallway lined with photos of Claire, Dad, and Lily. They'd gone out together that weekend to a local park, and apparently, it had been a big event, a family picnic complete with laughter, a little picnic blanket, and even a few goofy selfies. They all looked so happy, wrapped up in this new family life. And I couldn't ignore how out of place I felt in my own home. A few nights later, I was sitting in the living room, trying to read, when I overheard Claire and Dad talking in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "Lily is so happy here," Claire was saying, her voice full of warmth. "It feels like, I don't know, like we're finally settled, you know? Dad's reply was muffled, but I heard enough to catch the words family and our future. That phrase lingered, stabbing at something in my chest. Our future. It was like they were planning this life that I barely had a role in. The next day, I came down to breakfast to find them all at the table, laughing about something Lily had said. When I sat down, the laughter faded a bit, and the three of them shared a look. Dad gave me a small, careful smile. "Morning, Patrick. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I mumbled, reaching for some toast. The whole time, I could feel them watching me, trying to read me, as if they were hoping I'd jump in and join their conversation. But I just didn't feel like I could. They had their own rhythm, their own easy way of being together that felt so complete. I was an outsider, orbiting around their little world, but never quite part of it. Lily looked up from her cereal and gave me a wide grin. "Patrick, we're going to the lake this weekend. You should come." "Yeah, buddy," Dad chimed in, his voice too cheerful. "It'd be fun. Just the four of us." I hesitated, glancing at Claire, who gave me a hopeful look. "Maybe," I said, trying not to sound too distant. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. Watching them be a family while I struggled to feel like I fit in, it was hard. Harder than I wanted to admit. As the days went by, Dad kept trying to involve me, kept trying to make things work. He'd invite me on their little outings or suggest we do something as a family. But every time I joined them, it only reminded me of what had changed. It wasn't just me and Dad anymore. I didn't have him to myself, didn't have his attention the way I used to. Now, he had this new family he was pouring himself into, and even though I knew he still cared about me, it felt like I'd been demoted to the background. One evening, after another family dinner where I'd sat mostly in silence, I slipped away to my room. I took out Mom's ring, cradling it in my hand, feeling its weight, the cool metal against my palm. I wished I could talk to her, tell her everything I was feeling. I wanted her to tell me it was going to be okay, that I wasn't really being forgotten, that Dad hadn't replaced us. But all I had was silence. I whispered, "Mom, I feel like I'm losing everything we had. I'm trying to hold on, but it's like no one even sees me here." As the months passed, things between Dad, Claire, and Lily kept moving forward while I felt stuck in place. I watched them from a distance, going on their family trips, sharing inside jokes, and building this new life together that didn't seem to have a place for me. But despite the distance I felt, I couldn't ignore how much they cared for Lily. She was the center of their world, and Dad seemed happier than I'd seen him in years. A part of me understood why he was so wrapped up in this, but it didn't make it any easier to live through. Then, one day, everything changed. I was sitting in my room after school, halfway through my homework, when I heard muffled voices downstairs. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Dad and Claire had private conversations all the time. But as I listened, something in their tone was different. Their voices were low, almost tense, like they were sharing a secret too painful to say out loud. Unable to help myself, I crept down the stairs quietly, staying out of sight but close enough to hear. Claire's voice was shaky. I don't understand how this could happen. She's only 3, Jack. She's so young." There was a long pause, and then Dad replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's rare, but the doctor said it happens. They'll do everything they can, Claire. We'll get her through this. We have to." I felt my stomach twist as I realized they were talking about Lily. The weight of their words slowly sank in. She was sick. Not just with some cold or flu, but something serious. Something that had Claire's voice breaking and Dad struggling to keep his composure. They didn't say the word that day, but over the next few weeks, I heard it over and over again. Cancer. Lily, this bright, curious little girl who had brought so much energy into our home, was diagnosed with leukemia. It felt unreal, like something that happened in movies or to people far away, but not to someone in my own family. Yet, here it was unfolding right in front of me. The atmosphere in the house shifted. Days became marked by doctor appointments, hospital trips, and long nights where I'd hear Claire crying quietly from down the hall. Dad grew tense, almost haunted, as he tried to be strong for both of them. And Lily, she was still the same, at least at first. Still full of smiles, still bounding over to show me her crayon drawings, still inviting me to play tea party with her stuffed animals. But I noticed the changes creeping in. Her energy started fading. Her cheeks lost their color, and she got tired more quickly. One afternoon, I came home to find her lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale as she tried to stay awake through a cartoon. She spotted me coming in and flashed a weak smile, lifting her hand in a little wave. I waved back, feeling a strange mix of pity and sadness. I never wanted anything bad for Lily, even if it was hard to watch Dad pour so much of himself into her. But seeing her like that, I felt something shift inside me. One evening, when Dad thought I'd gone to bed, he and Claire sat on the couch, their voices soft but intense. I heard him say, "We'll do whatever it takes, Claire. We'll find a way to pay for this treatment. She deserves every chance." I had no idea what kind of treatment they were talking about, but I knew it must be expensive. Dad's job paid well enough to keep us comfortable, but not for the kind of bills that came with cancer treatments. I felt a pang of guilt for every time I'd been bitter or resentful about Claire and Lily. Whatever else had happened, they didn't deserve this. No one did. The next morning at breakfast, Dad looked at me across the table, his face drawn and weary. "Patrick," he said gently, "I know things have been hard, but I need you to understand what's going on with Lily." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I do understand, Dad. I know she's really sick." He took a deep breath, and his eyes met mine, filled with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "We're going to do everything we can for her. We have to, Patrick. This might be her only chance." I nodded again, but I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would show I understood, but I was caught in this strange place, stuck between resentment for the way things had turned out and a growing sympathy for this little girl who didn't deserve any of it. As I left the table that morning, I found myself clutching Mom's ring tightly around my neck. It was my own way of making sense of the world, to keep something of her close to me. It was my anchor, grounding me when everything around me felt like it was spinning out of control. I had no idea that soon enough, that small piece of her would become a point of tension that would change everything. The weeks went by in a blur. Hospital visits and doctor appointments became a part of our family routine, and the tension in the house was constant. Dad was on edge all the time, and Claire was barely holding it together. It was like walking on eggshells every day. No one knew what to say anymore. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, I came home to find Dad waiting for me in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. When I walked in, he looked up, and I could tell he'd been trying to work up the courage to say something important. "Patrick," he said, patting the spot next to him on the couch. "Can you sit down? There's something I need to talk to you about." I sat down slowly, a bit apprehensive. The look in his eyes was heavy, almost desperate. I'd never seen him like that before. I could feel my heart start to race a little. "Patrick," he began, his voice careful, "I know you know how serious things are with Lily. The doctors have suggested a treatment, a really promising one. But it's expensive, and we're running out of options." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Okay, so what does that mean?" He sighed, struggling to find the right words. "I don't want you to feel pressured, Patrick, but I've been thinking about your mother's ring." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My hand instinctively went to the ring hanging from the chain around my neck. It was still there, just as it had always been, the only piece of her that I had left. "Dad, no." The words came out before I'd even had a chance to think them through. "You can't be serious. This ring, it's Mom's. She left it to me. It's the only thing I have of hers." Dad looked away, rubbing his temples as if he'd expected this reaction, but didn't know how to handle it. "I know, Patrick. I know how much it means to you. But you have to understand, this is life or death for Lily. If there was any other way, I'd take it." I clenched the ring tightly, feeling the metal press into my palm. "Dad, she left it to me. This ring has been in the family for generations. It's not just jewelry, it's Mom." He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and then turned back to face me. "Patrick, please. I wouldn't ask you to do this if it wasn't important. It's not just a ring. It could save her life." The way he looked at me, his eyes pleading, shook me. I could see how much he needed this, how much he believed in what he was asking. But all I could feel was anger, this raw betrayal building up inside me. I knew Lily was sick, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to her. But this ring, it was mine. Mom's memory was tied to it, and I couldn't just hand it over. Dad, I don't think you get it. This is the last piece of her I have left. My voice was shaking, and I felt my throat tighten. You don't understand. I can't just give it up. It's not fair. He looked at me with a mix of frustration and disappointment. Patrick, sometimes in life we have to make sacrifices for the people we care about. I know this is hard, but family is everything. Lily is family now, and we have to do everything we can for her. Even if it's hard. I shook my head, trying to keep the anger from boiling over. But this isn't just some random thing. It's all I have left of Mom. I know Lily is family, but this ring is mine. It's hers. You don't get to take that away from me. He sighed, dropping his head into his hands. Patrick, I need you to think about this. Think about what Mom would do if she were here. She'd want us to help if we could, wouldn't she? The mention of Mom, of what she would do, felt like a low blow. But I didn't know what to say. Part of me knew he was probably right, that she would have wanted us to do everything we could to help. But another part of me, the part that had been holding on to that ring for years, the part that saw it as my only connection to her, couldn't bring myself to even imagine giving it up. I stood up, unable to look at him any longer. I can't, Dad. I'm sorry, but I can't. Dad looked up at me, his face filled with disappointment. Patrick, I wish you could see how selfish this sounds. Lily needs us. She's a part of this family, too. Hearing him say that cut me deeply. Selfish? I hadn't thought of it that way. But this ring, Mom's memory, it felt like all I had left, something I'd guarded so carefully since she passed. How could he ask me to give it up? I didn't answer. I turned and went to my room, closing the door behind me. The house was silent, but inside, my head was a storm of anger, guilt, and sadness all crashing together. I knew Dad thought he was doing what was best, but it felt like he was choosing this new family over everything we'd had. After that conversation, Dad and I barely spoke. Days passed in strained silence, and every interaction felt like walking through thick fog. I knew he was frustrated with me, maybe even hurt, but I couldn't get past the feeling of betrayal. The house felt colder, the warmth that we'd had together gone, replaced by this uncomfortable, unspoken tension between us. I clung even tighter to the ring after that night. Whenever I felt the heaviness of everything, I'd slip into my room, close the door, and hold the ring in my hand, just feeling its weight and reminding myself that at least I still had this one piece of Mom with me. Sometimes I'd lie on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fight over and over, as if somehow it would change the outcome. But deep down, I knew I wasn't budging, and neither was he. Then one afternoon, after a long day at school, I came home to find Dad waiting for me in the living room. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, an expression on his face that was hard to read. I glanced away, feeling that familiar anger bubbling up. I was about to head to my room when he said quietly, Patrick, there's something you need to know. I stopped, a strange feeling settling in my gut. What? He cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on the floor. I've had to make a decision, one I didn't want to make, but I felt it was the right thing. A chill ran down my spine. I reached up, instinctively grabbing for the chain around my neck. But as my fingers closed around it, my heart dropped. The chain was there, but the ring was gone. I froze, my hand gripping the empty chain. Dad, my voice shook. Where's the ring? He didn't answer right away, just stood there looking at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. Patrick, I know it was important to you, but it was our only option. My entire body went cold. I could feel my hands start to tremble as the truth sank in. You sold it. The words came out like a whisper, the horror of it overwhelming me. Patrick, you sold it. I shouted, my voice breaking. You took it without asking. That was mine, Dad. It was all I had of Mom. He took a step forward, hands up, pleading. Patrick, please listen to me. Lily needed this. It was her last chance, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I know this hurts, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love. That wasn't your choice to make. My voice rose, each word sharper than the last. It was my ring, my memory of Mom. How could you? How could you take that from me? He flinched, looking away, Patrick, I know it doesn't seem fair, but one day you'll understand. You'll see that family means making hard choices, doing what's right, even if it hurts. But all I could feel was the weight of the empty chain around my neck, the coldness of betrayal settling in. You don't get it, do you? You took away the only thing that mattered to me, the only thing I had left of her. He took a deep breath, his voice softer, almost regretful. I'm sorry, Patrick. I really am. But Lily's life was at stake. My throat tightened, and I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I turned away from him, too angry and hurt to even look at him. You didn't just sell a ring, Dad. You sold the last part of Mom I had. Without another word, I walked to my room and shut the door, the sound echoing through the house. I clutched the empty chain in my hand, the emptiness of it cutting into me like a knife. The finality of it all was suffocating. Mom was gone, and now the last tangible piece of her was gone too. And Dad, my own father, was the one who had taken it from me. As I sat on my bed, numbness crept over me, filling in the cracks where the anger and pain had been. In that moment, I realized something that would shape the years to come. I had lost the ring, yes, but I had lost something bigger than that. I had lost my trust in him. I didn't know how I could ever look at him the same way again. After that day, something broke between Dad and me, something that couldn't be fixed with words. I felt like I was drifting, detached from him, from our home, from any idea of family we'd ever shared. The ring had been the last tie, the final link to the life I had with Mom, and now it was gone. In the weeks that followed, I tried to avoid Dad as much as possible. I'd leave early for school and come home late, claiming I had extra homework or projects. Most nights, I barely showed up at the dinner table. Claire noticed, of course. I'd catch her watching me, her face full of worry and a hint of guilt. I could tell she wanted to reach out, maybe even talk about what had happened, but she didn't. Maybe she knew it wouldn't help. Even Lily noticed. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, staring up at the stars, when she came over and tugged on my sleeve. "Patrick, you're sad," she said simply, her small hand holding onto mine. "Did something happen?" I tried to force a smile. "No, Lily. I'm okay. Just thinking." She tilted her head, her big blue eyes staring into mine. "It's okay to be sad. Mom says I can talk to her when I'm sad." For a split second, I felt a strange pull of warmth for Lily. She didn't understand the mess between Dad and me, or how everything had fallen apart. To her, I was just Patrick, her big brother, and she wanted to make things better in the only way she knew how. But her kindness, her innocence, only made the hurt worse. "Thanks, Lily," I said, patting her hand. "You're sweet." She smiled and skipped back inside, and I sat alone, the empty chain still around my neck, reminding me of everything I'd lost. The years passed in a blur after that. High school came and went, and with each passing year, I counted down the days until I could finally leave. I took on a part-time job, saving every penny with one goal in mind, to get out. Dad and I barely spoke anymore, the weight of that empty chain around my neck a constant reminder of the wedge between us. Sometimes he'd try to talk to me, saying things like, "Patrick, you'll always be my son," or "We're family no matter what." But his words rang hollow, empty promises that couldn't erase what he'd done. I couldn't look at him without feeling the loss, the betrayal. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I packed up what little I needed, grabbed the savings I'd put together, and left. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even to Lily. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This house had been my home, a place filled with memories of Mom. And yet now it felt like a stranger's house, the place where my father had chosen to start a new life without me. The next day, Dad tried to call. He left messages, his voice strained, saying, "Patrick, you'll always be my son. I'm sorry for what happened, but please don't walk away from us." But I couldn't bring myself to answer. I let the calls go to voicemail until eventually they stopped. Years went by. I built my own life, a life far away from Dad, Claire, and Lily. I had my own apartment, a job I liked, and friends who'd become my chosen family. In the quiet moments, I'd still think of Mom, her memory lingering in small ways. A song that reminded me of her, a scent that took me back to our old house. But I'd left the past behind, or at least I thought I had. Then one afternoon, out of nowhere, my phone rang, and the name on the screen stopped me cold. It was Dad. I stared at the screen, debating whether to pick up. But something in me, maybe a leftover piece of the son who once trusted his father, made me answer. "Hello, Patrick." Dad's voice was thin, weaker than I remembered. It's been a long time." "Yeah," I replied, my tone guarded. "It has." There was a pause, and then he continued, his words halting. "Patrick, I'm calling because Lily's cancer came back. It's aggressive, and well, we're trying to do everything we can. But we're struggling, and I thought maybe." I felt a mix of shock and anger rise up inside me. "Are you serious, Dad? After everything, you're calling me to ask for help? You really think I'd just forget what happened? That I'd give up more for your new family? Patrick, please." His voice broke, and I could hear the desperation, the fear. "I know what I did was wrong. I've regretted it every day. I know I failed you. And if I could take it back, I would. But this is about her life. I thought maybe you could find it in yourself to help. The memories of that lost ring, the betrayal, and the years of silence hung between us, heavy and unyielding." I took a long, steadying breath, my heart racing with anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but cold, "I don't owe you anything. You took the one thing I had left of Mom, and now you're calling to ask me for more? I'm sorry about Lily, but that's not my responsibility." There was a long silence on the other end, the weight of those words settling over us both. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I understand. I'm sorry, Patrick. I just thought maybe things could be different." I didn't answer. I ended the call, feeling a strange numbness wash over me, the last of my ties to my old life finally severed.